If you're a longtime listener of Developer Tea, then you might remember today's guest from a very early episode. In fact, episode number 19 and 20, I interviewed Ben Orenstein. Ben is one of my personal inspirations over the years, in particular as a Ruby developer, as well as a craftsman, somebody who cares about his tooling. And Ben has gone on from where he was back in 2015, and now he is kind of venturing out and doing his own projects. We talk more about that in today's episode. By the way, happy New Year's Eve, and for those of you who don't listen to this on New Year's Eve, whatever day you do download this episode, welcome to 2019. I hope that your 2018 was productive and rewarding, and that you were able to connect with your career purpose in 2018. And then I also hope that as you look forward into 2019, that you are thankful for the things that happened in 2018, both good and bad, and that you treat everything, both in 2018 and the future experiences that you have, as opportunities for learning. This is hard to do sometimes. It's difficult to look back on painful experiences and try to, draw out a lesson from them. But that is the kind of the best scenario, the best case scenario, if we can look back and draw out some kind of learning from our painful experiences. So I hope for everyone who's listening to this, as you move into 2019, that you continue to grow both in your personal life and on that end of the spectrum, all the way to the other end of the spectrum in your professional life, in your career. I hope that all of those things kind of continue to grow for the people who listen to this show. I truly want the best for you, and that's why I continue to record these episodes to hopefully provide some new perspective, some insight that you haven't heard before. And today's episode is hopefully no exception. So let's get into the episode with Ben Orenstein. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
So this is your second time actually being on Developer Tea. Way back in the day, I had to go and look it up. I think it was, episode 15 or something that you were on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been a while, and a lot has changed for you since then. I believe you were at Thoughtbot when we talked last, and we're going to get into some of that stuff. But first, I want to start out by asking you a question that I don't know if I asked you in the first episode or not that we did together, but the question is really simple, and hopefully it kind of drives some of our conversation. What do you wish more people would ask you about?
That's interesting. I think one of my favorite things to talk about that doesn't come up that often is the fact that I do multiple things in my life that are that people tend to look at and assume it is a talent-based skill that's affected greatly by your innate abilities. That is in fact a practice-based skill where the results are coming from a long years of repetitions on that thing. And I can tell you what those things are. So the two big ones that stand out for me are, one is programming, where people that are, I notice this happens less with people that are actually developers, but it's very common for people that are less technical. When I tell them what I do for a living, they're like, "Oh, I could never do that." And it's like, well, actually, yes, you could. If you had to, you could. If it meant your family would die if you didn't, you would figure it out. It's just hard. And so if you do it kind of casually or look at it lightly, you might assume that it's too hard for you, or that there's some magical innate programming ability thing. But I don't really think that's the case. And the other is music. So I sing, and that is even more susceptible to this phenomenon where people will just constantly tell me I'm like, I sing. I'm like, oh, I could never do that. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, oh, I have a terrible voice. And I'll be like, well, how many voice lessons have you had? Oh, well, none. Okay, well, has anyone ever tried to teach you how to sing? Well, no. Okay, well, I bet you also suck at pretty much everything else that shares those traits.
Anything at all that you can imagine practicing at. If you haven't practiced at all, then yeah, you're not going to be very good at it, right?
Totally. And it's beyond that, where I think most people are kind of willing to accept that that position. Like, okay, yeah, there probably are things that you get better at if you practice, but there's something about certain skills or certain fields, and like programming and singing seem to be two of them at least, where people just assume it's like it's a thing where you've got it or you don't. And so, if you, and you can know if you don't have it from the outside.
Yeah, it's like some kind of mystical special element
Exactly.
of DNA or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oddly enough, we often, on the flip side, in areas where we probably should attribute a little bit more to DNA, like for example, some people going to the gym and working out are just going to have different results than you will, right?
Mm.
There's like this interesting dichotomy that we've assigned some things that label of attainable, given enough work, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you really focus on it, then you can be just as cut as X movie star, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then on the flip side, these other, and I'm not really sure what the line is.
Mm.
What is the bucketing? Why do we do that?
I wonder if the fitness one is because it's so profitable to convince people that these results
Yeah,
are
maybe
achievable for
so.
everyone.
Yeah, because there's not really a bunch of voice lesson schools on every corner
That's
of
right.
of every city, right?
Yeah. And like if you show someone a picture of a set of abs, everyone can kind of say like, "Oh yeah, like I could figure out how to get that or something," or like they can imagine themselves doing it, I think.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's worth a lot of money if you can convince them of that.
yeah. That's a very interesting dichotomy. I think it is interesting that you mentioned that developers kind of understand that the quality of, yeah, it's not really about talent. It's about spending time with this stuff
Mm-hmm.
and practicing and doing kind of deliberate practice, learning what are the contours of this given language, or whatever the thing is that you're trying to learn, rather than somehow you were born with a natural ability to understand data structures, right? That's not really it's not really built in.
Yeah, I think this is a thing that I think people, it's a conclusion they come to after they've spent some time with it. Like, I think once you demystify it a little bit by like working really hard at it for a little while, you start to realize that like the people at the upper end of the field skill wise are mostly just more experienced. And like, yeah, there's a little bit of like raw mental horsepower that will act as a kind of multiplier, I think. But I
Yeah.
feel like the more that I learn and the more that I see, it's like the best developers, the ones that I admire the most, are not particularly like brilliant individuals. They're not like, they're on the smarter side of the median, I would say, but it's not like they're just like ungodly intelligent. It's more like they have really great habits and they've learned really great things from other really great programmers over the years.
Yeah, I'm kind of delineating in my mind right now some of the people that I would say are truly, uniquely gifted mentally. Uh, People like Donald Knuth, right? This is a giant in the field, and if you read some of the art of computer programming, you're going to hopefully come away. For me, I came away humbled, right? It
Mm.
felt I felt so. Um, I felt like I was approaching the craft with a big jackhammer, and he approaches it with a whole closet full of fine tools. And this is just such a different way of thinking about computing. And of course, we're in totally different fields. Donald Knuth, if anybody's not familiar, is more of like a theoretical uh, computation, super master. He's
Hmm.
kind of one of the industry's godfathers in a way, and
Hmm.
he's responsible for a lot of thought on algorithms and that kind of stuff. But Donald Knuth also isn't writing software on a day-to-day basis for money, right? That's not what his job is. He's a professor, and these are
Hmm.
totally different things. And I think in programming, in software development, whether you're a web developer, backend developer, whatever, that we conflate the ideas of anybody who touches code. We kind of put them into a singular column, right? And that's just not a realistic picture of an industry. And
Hmm.
this industry is one that has now kind of spread out and now is no longer a single industry, but is actually spreading into multiple industries.
Totally. And I think I'm going to bring it back to music for a second because I think it provides a useful visual where if you are like we can even stay in computer science. If you want to publish the art of computer programming and have like publish a work that changes your field, yeah, you probably need some amount of natural ability. Like for you to be in the top 0.01% of something, you probably need a bit of a head start mentally. And
Yeah.
like, if you want to sell out a stadium as like an incredible operatic tenor, you probably need like to have your skull be the right shape and like vocal cords that have the right shape. So you need a little bit of an advantage there. But for most people, like we just want to have a good job and a good life, and like you don't need to achieve at that level. But that's who gets all the attention. And so you think, well, I could never do that. And like, yeah, you're right, you probably couldn't. But do you really need to?
Right. There's a absolutely excellent article that even a step further down, right now we're kind of talking about becoming really good at something, good enough that you can be professional at it. But this article was talking about the kind of in praise of mediocre, I believe was the name of the article.
Mm,
And the whole point of it was that we've lost this ability, culturally speaking, to appreciate our very simple abilities. So, like the weekend warrior basketball player in the
mm,
'90s, this was something that could have been, and I'm not glorifying, not the '90s by any means, but at some period in time, there was a sense of okayness with just being good enough to enjoy something, right? You don't
totally.
have to be the best cook to make a good meal. You don't have to be the best basketball player to go and get some exercise playing basketball and enjoy yourself in the process. And instead, what we've done in a lot of arenas is instead of being able to pursue hobbies for the sake of, kind of leisure, we've turned them into these kind of pseudo professional endeavors where we're trying to
Hmm.
get really good, even though it's never going to be a part of what makes a living for us, right? There's not really a reason to become good at it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that rings very true. I keep bringing it back to music, but people used to sing like socially, like back in the 30s, for example. Like it was a social activity to come over and stand around the piano, and everyone would just sing, and no one was professional
Mm.
quality, but that wasn't the point. It was you were doing it for fun, and you would enjoy it, and you weren't comparing yourself to like YouTube phenoms that you happen to run into.
Right. We actually, my wife and I visited Ireland. I guess this was 3 or 4 years ago now. And there were many, many occasions when you would walk into a pub in Ireland. I encourage anybody who has never gone to go and check this out. It's so much fun. You walk into a pub and people are just sitting around with instruments and they're playing music, exactly
Mm,
like what you're saying. And it's like this sense of instead of everybody minding their own business and just talking at the bar or whatever, you have a community there. And it may even be ad hoc, like people are coming in from other cities or tourists are walking in the door like we did, but everybody's joining in this kind of, it's more of like a momentary enjoyment than it is, nobody's recording this. Nobody is
mm.
trying to make money off of it. The bar doesn't even really care whether it's happening or not. And they just host it. It's just kind of there.
Yeah, I love it. I think the appreciation for doing things as an amateur has perhaps waned a bit, and we could rekindle that. I think that would be good for the world.
I think so too. And I think that even for amateur developers, sometimes there are people who listen to the show right now who you enjoy being an amateur developer and you have another job maybe, and you don't really need to go any further than that. Like, that's okay. Nobody should be pressuring you to, turn this into your career just because you have enough talent that you could, right? That's not a reason to choose a career by any means.
Totally. Yeah, agree.
Well, Ben, I want to talk to you about the changes that you've gone through over the past couple of years, starting, I guess, back in 2015 or so. I can't remember exactly when it was that you decided to kind of strike out on your own, to blaze your own path, I guess. But do you want to tell that story?
Sure. Yeah. So this actually started back in early 2017, I believe it was.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken. But, who doesn't really matter. A few years ago. So I was working at Thoughtbot, and Thoughtbot was like an amazing job. It was, as far as jobs go, about as good as it could get, particularly in the latest implementation of it for me, which was I was running a number of Thoughtbot's SaaS products. We had a number of small SaaS companies that we had launched, and I was basically like the product manager / mini CEO of those tiny business units, and really enjoyed that. But it had been like 6 years that I had been at Thoughtbot, and I had this thing in me where I kind of need to blow everything up every 18 months or so, or I just need to make I need to have enough challenge happening, enough newness happening pretty regularly. And I had done that a few times. Like, I kind of reinvented my job at Thoughtbot several times, and they were like amazingly cool about that. But I reached this point where I had been there for a while, and I kind of couldn't picture the next thing that I wanted to do in within the auspices of Thoughtbot. And so I kind of turned it over in my head for a while, and then eventually decided that I was going to leave. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I decided I'd rather leave and figure it out than figure it out and then leave, because it felt like time. And so I quit, and that sort of started like phase one. And the first thing I did was I decided to make a course for people. So I built like an info product, which was about refactoring mature Rails applications, which is more or less taking a lot of the stuff I had learned at Thoughtbot over the years and turning it into a video course. And it worked pretty well as far as like a commercial success. Like I launched it, and the sales were good, and people liked the course, and I could see how I could make another one, and it would probably, be similar. But the lifestyle was not what I was into. Like I was working solo, which was never like my favorite thing, but I really did not like it. Like I'm very much a team person. I'm very extroverted. And so I was doing solo stuff because I wanted to just like get out and then figure it out. But that was never like, I never would have picked it. I never would have said, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's how I want to live my days. So I was feeling kind of down. And so I was a little directionless for a little bit. And I very briefly took another job just because I was like, oh, I can't figure out quite what I want to do. So let me get a little income and get some social time. But I knew that I've thought for a long time, like I feel like my eventual destiny is running a software company. And that was partly why I was so interested in doing that at Thoughtbot, because I've been sort of trying to orient my career in that direction for such a long time and like learn the skills I needed to learn. But I never had the like confluence of the right idea and also people to do it with. And finally, that actually happened back in May of this year. So I was working this job. Yeah. And so I was working this job and not really into it again. And but I had a friend who I had known for years, and we used to get together and talk about business ideas, because he created a startup, sold that startup to a larger company, and was like feeling similarly not inspired. And after enough of those sessions, like maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, we kind of came across an idea that we both liked and felt exciting enough that we're like, maybe this is the one. And eventually it ended up being the one.
If you have a project of any sufficient size, then you are almost certainly using managed cloud services. These save you time and effort, because it doesn't really make sense for you to go and build your own logging platform or your own authentication service and protocol. These are things that you shouldn't be focusing on. You need to be focusing on your product. But how do you find the right services, the right cloud managed services to integrate? And then how do you learn how to stitch them all together? Finally, how do you manage access and credentials between multiple projects and even multiple teams? Managing these details alone and making these decisions, well, it can feel like a full-time job on its own. Manifold makes your life easier in this regard by providing a single workflow to organize your services, connect your integrations, and share with your team. Now, on top of this, it's going to help you find the right services in the Manifold marketplace, or if you have a custom integration that you just don't want to let go of, well, you can bring that too. You can manage it all in one dashboard. Now, the best part of this is that Manifold is free. It's free to use. Go to manifold.co/devt, and they're going to give you $10 worth of credit to use on the services that Manifold allows you to coordinate through their system. Head over to manifold.co/devt, that's DEVTEA, and you'll get $10 worth of credit to use on any service on the Manifold Marketplace. Thank you again to Manifold for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Tea. So I have a lot of questions about this journey. First of all, what advice would you give to people who are kind of facing a similar feeling of, I want to do something different. I'm not really happy with where I am, but I also am a little bit intrepidated by leaving without a plan. What do you recommend to people? Because I know that you said you kind of jumped and then learned how to fly kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what do you recommend for developers who are in similar predicaments?
I don't know that I should offer advice on this, or I don't know that I would like lift the level of my experience to like recommended advice.
Sure.
I've figured out what works for me, which is like I kind of enjoy a little bit of that chaos and just figuring it out on the fly. And I prefer it to the like working a job I don't like or feeling like I'm not growing chafes me. And I find it very mentally draining and I really don't like it. And so the cost of staying to me is pretty high. And the cost of chaos, like I'm single and over the years I had saved a lot of money. And so I wasn't worrying about cash at that time. And so I had a pretty good, like mentally and financially, I was in a pretty good place to do what I did. But I would hesitate to recommend the same path because I don't know how other people are wired or what their situations are. Like it wouldn't be feasible for lots of folks, I assume.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you pointed out a few things that people don't necessarily intuitively assume, right? That you are, completely cash secure and that makes you in a different category than, say, the average person who's not making as much as they want to make, and they want to leave for that specific reason, for example. So there's a couple of interesting things that you mentioned here. One is that, being in a cash secure position, that certainly changes your mindset about where you should be. For me personally, it would be really tough, right? I have a wife and I have a son, and for me to leave without being cash secure would be terrifying, right? But at the same time, you're also mentioning this other piece of the puzzle, which is the cost of staying and the pain that it causes, not necessarily because you don't like the people or because the job is bad per se, but because for whatever reason, you're unsettled there. And that's a really important thing to try to evaluate.
Totally. I actually, so I feel like there are actually a number of people. I feel like my willingness to make a change when I want my life to be different is pretty high. And I think maybe I would like elevate this a little bit towards advice, which is like maybe see if you can just increase your willingness a little bit. Like maybe it's not like blow up your job and like go out not knowing what you're even going to do. But I have like some friends who will tell me about how crappy their job is. And I'm like, You're a developer. Like the market for your skills is crazy. Like if you're not happy with what's going on, I think you are crazy to not at least investigate and see if you can find something better.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, and the jobs are still growing. It is certainly an open field. And I think another piece of the puzzle that I think is important that I'm interested to know how you dealt with this concept is like a contingency, right? So like if this fails, then what happens? In the worst case scenario, and there's some ideas from, even from Stoic literature, for example, of, kind of meditating on the bad, meditating on the possible pain that you might experience, and taking some time to decide, like, is it worth it to do that? And this concept is really powerful to me. For me, it actually helped me when I decided to leave my previous job. The worst case scenario for me was that I would end up, living with my parents again or something like that. I don't know what I had decided was the worst case scenario. but that was acceptable to me. And I decided then that, this is not go bankrupt and end up in jail. That's not the pain that I would experience in the worst case. In the worst case, I'm going to have a new platform to start from, a new, perspectives to start from, and I will be able to recover from this no matter what.
Yeah, totally. I think enumerating the worst case scenario is really useful, because a lot of the times your fear is kind of generalized. We're like, oh, I can't leave. Like, why? Oh, because it's scary. Okay, why? And sometimes when you dig down into that why, it's actually not that scary.
Yeah, or there's something that you haven't dealt with, right? And that was the case for me. Is I had a lot of really close, and still do, a lot of close personal relationships at my previous position, and dealing with, moving into a new position away from those close relationships, I had a lot of strife over that, and dealing with the possibility that this might hurt relationships. That was the thing internally that I hadn't really dealt with. And it wasn't really about fear. It was more about, deciding how to approach it. And once I had done that, the rest of it kind of fell into place.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Working through stuff that you need to work through is huge. That's why therapy is so good.
It is. And in fact, this is I've been going to therapy this past year. I plan on going next year.
Nice.
Certainly something that I recommend for pretty much everybody, honestly.
Same. Yeah, when I started this company, I actually preemptively got a therapist and started going, even though it wasn't stressful at the time. I was like, I'm sure it's going to get stressful, and so it'd be nice to have this relationship already established.
Yeah, it's actually something that my therapist told me. He said, it's best to come to therapy when you're healthy. And I thought that was a really interesting point. He said, yeah, it's really good because you establish the correct way. Like, you could have the picture of mental health, but actually have some wrong patterns, some wrong ways of approaching things, wrong ways of coping. And then when something happens, then all of the facade of the good health that you had just falls apart. And so now you're left with this, really frustrating situation where you thought everything was great and suddenly it's bad.
Right. Yeah. Like you don't want to refactor when you're under a huge load of traffic, right?
That's
you got to do it when things are calm.
And you know what? That query that you have sitting there that is doing okay with the 100 users that you have on day one is probably not so great with 100,000 users.
Totally. There's something I want to come back to for a second, which is I think worth mentioning, which is I was able, the biggest enabling factor of me being able to go on this adventure and then later start the company that I did, is that I had been pretty diligent about putting away money. And I realize this is kind of a privileged position, and not everyone can do it. But if you are especially if you're a single person, you don't have a family to support, and you have a reasonably good developer salary, there's so much slack in your finances. It's so easy to not put away money. That's the default. That's totally, and it's very reasonable. And I did that for a long time. That was my default. And then I just kind of started trying to get a little bit better at it with each month and year, and educate myself and all that. And I just built a handful of habits that over time led to this decent nest egg that let me go do this. And so I would implore people, if you're in this situation, if you're especially you're a little bit on the younger side and you're not used to a super inflated lifestyle and you don't have people to support and you're making a developer salary, you can put away a decent amount of money. And when I was doing it, I didn't know what I was going to use it for. It wasn't in my this is for X fund. It was just someday I'm going to be really glad I have this. And it turns out I was so right, because being able to bootstrap my company right now is wonderful, and I'm really glad I'm able to do that.
So let's take a few minutes then, and I want to trade advice here with you back and forth. And
sure.
I'll say, some of the things that I've done to help me do exactly that. I think developers actually need to hear this, because you're right. And this is a unique thing about developers. Developers, generally speaking, coming out of school, especially if you're going to one of the big tech companies, you're suddenly faced with a pretty big paycheck. It's and typically it's pretty young. young developers that end up with these relatively large paychecks. And sometimes, and I would say perhaps even often, you are outpacing what even your own parents made at the height of their careers, right?
Sure.
So, and that's just kind of a reality that software developers are facing, and it can be a good thing. It can also be a really crippling thing for a couple of reasons. But the important thing to notice here is that you don't have the many years of, financial experience, I will say. I won't even call it wisdom, but just experience that someone who typically is making the salary that you're making at, let's say, 25 years old, they're making it at 45 years old, right? So they have this 20-year gap. Now, that's not to say that you can't learn how to deal with money when you're 25 years old, but it is to say that a lot of 25-year-olds don't do that. They don't go and learn how to deal with money because a lot of your life expenses, for example, your health is generally going to be good when you're 25. Again, we're making broad assumptions here on the show, so I apologize to anybody who this is not true for. But your health is relatively good. If you're single, then you're not really supporting a lot of dependents, for example. And so you have potentially a lot of disposable income, and it's easy to do a lot of dumb things with that, right? Just humans do really dumb things sometimes. So I personally was lucky enough to, stumble on. First of all, I have a little bit of a compulsion to protect my money. it's part of my personality. And some people have that, some people don't. But I was, lucky enough that I stumbled on some financial resources early on and realized that, hey, you know what? The most important thing I can do, and this is my first tip, and then I'll turn over the floor to you, Ben. But my first tip is to, set up some kind of automatic saving. That seems so dumb and simple, but any kind of automatic saving, it can literally be, $100 out of your paycheck every time you get a paycheck, put it off into an account that's really hard for you to access. And that's it. And if that's the only thing that you do, you're going to be actually pretty far ahead from the average person in a year or two.
Yeah, that's funny because that's my tip too. That of all the things that I did over the years, that made the biggest difference. It's making it saving. Yeah, it's making it automatic. It's making it so that it's opt out, or that you would have to do additional steps to fail that goal. That is what pushed it over the edge. It didn't matter when I set savings goals and kind of obsessed with what was going in and what was coming out. That had way less impact than literally just setting it up. I did it with direct deposit, so it was even more annoying to undo. I would have employers you have to submit a written form that says please deposit 10% of each paycheck into this account or something. Yeah. And so it was annoying to change. And so I wanted it to be annoying. And that was just what that steady drip. It was just it's just as you humans are amazing adaptation machines. So if you go from being a poor college student to suddenly making $10,000 a month, you will be used to $10,000 a month in 2 months.
So fast.
It goes by so fast. It'll take almost no time at all. And then, that hurts you. That adaptation kind of hurts you because it makes your default to not save, because what used to feel like a ton does not anymore. But you can take advantage of that in the reverse direction, where if you say, actually, JK, I'm going to put $2,000 a month in a savings account automatically, and suddenly your disposable income goes from 10 to 8, and that takes 2 months to get used to, and then you're used to that too. We're just good at adapting to whatever the current situation is. So use that to your advantage.
And adapt ahead of time. So that would be my next piece is don't try to adapt after the fact, because what you'll end up doing is you'll adapt your lifestyle by, for example, and this is something I wouldn't recommend, but taking on, big vehicle debts or something like that. And you extend everything out to where everything kind of meets your budget right at its limit. And then you try to cut into that budget with savings.
Right.
And now you're in this position where, well, crap, do I sell that vehicle? And then you're going to take a loss on the sell. And there's just a lot of reasons to, anytime, for example, throughout your career, you will hopefully, assuming that you're working for a good company, you're probably going to get a raise. When you get that raise, decide up front, how much of this do I want to use to increase my quality of life today? And how much of this do I want to save for later? That seems like such a simple thing to do, but as it turns out, it's hugely important.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I like this so much. And you sort of touched on this, but when you do that, then you're avoiding like the really pernicious force here, which is lifestyle inflation, which is like when you're like, most of us were probably like, if you think back to a time you were really happy in your youth, like in college or high school or something, or I can think of, for me personally, I really enjoyed college. I had a great time. I was totally happy. I think I made like $8,000 a year. Or like a few years after school. I mean, I remember being like, I was making like $32,000 a year and was like, this is great. I have great friends. I'm having a good time. I felt like I was living fairly lavishly, honestly. And then like a few years later, I'm making 3 times that, and it's like, oh yeah, and like this is also great. I feel the same amount happy, but now I'm used to things where it's like, oh, like, well, I would never like do my own laundry now. I can just do wash, dry, fold, and someone else will do it, and that just becomes like, well, I need this. This is now an essential expense because I'm used to this feeling of laziness or convenience or comfort or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like,
yeah.
Oh, now I'm the kind of person that should have a car that is a certain amount nice. And I should care what people think about that and what I think and all that. And it's just it's so easy to let that creep into your life.
Yeah, and it's much harder to eliminate it. Once
exactly.
Especially because there are sometimes when you've actually made commitments, like you've actually gone and bought that car, and even if you could eliminate it, man, it's still it's going to be a much more of a headache to eliminate it after the fact than it would have been, to say no up front.
Totally. Yeah. So if you can find some friends that like are not developers or like that have like less making less money, I think that's a good influence. Like that's a good way to do it. And then like they'll sort of keep you in line. They're like, oh, should we do this thing? I'm like, oh, that's expensive. You're like, oh yeah, that is. Yeah. Sorry. Let's not do that. Just kind of adjust your perception.
That's actually one of the benefits of being a remote developer. A lot of my friends and a lot of the developers that are around where I live are not paid the same that a developer in Silicon Valley might be. And so now you don't have that same, status kind of war,
Yeah,
or at least comparison, habit.
Totally. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Okay. So, maybe a couple of last really small tips there. One of the things that my wife and I did really early on is we really focused hard on paying down our debts. And I don't believe that this is the best, mathematically speaking, the best decision to make. But for us, psychologically speaking, it had a profound effect. So we know that we have, a very small list of debts. The house is pretty much the main debt that we have. And so because we were so, focused on that, now we don't have the kind of the barrage of snail mail coming in reminding us just how much of our money has to go out. So that's really, at least from a psychological perspective, has been really profound for us.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Do you want my like 40-second spiel on investing?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Here's the quick and dirty. Educate yourselves and all. Like this is of all the advice you take on the internet, like investing advice is probably the worst thing to listen to. But here's my version, and then like go see if this matches with you. Max out your 401k match with your employer. That's pretty essential. Try not to put your long-term investments in anything that's like a managed mutual fund. That's all garbage. The only thing that's worth putting your money in is Vanguard funds. They're by far the cheapest. They have the lowest expenses. Expenses matter to them more than almost anything. No fund manager can pick stocks. No fund manager can pick bonds. Everything in that industry is bullshit. And stay away from financial advisors that make money based on a percentage of funds that you have invested with them.
There you go. So yeah, most of the services, kind of the on-demand 401k services, if you're working for a startup, a lot of these are using something like Vanguard in the back office, and really for their benefit as well as yours, because for them, they aren't having to, pay those management fees. Really what you're paying for with those is convenience. and your company is likely going to be paying the fee for that anyway. So most people, luckily, you can kind of trust the 401k that your company offers. And I agree 100% that maxing out your 401k and then, really seeking at least, I would say, seek some advice from a financial advisor. Once or twice. You don't really have to go gung-ho and go talk to a financial advisor all the time. It's not the same thing as therapy, right? So
Sure.
you can probably set up a long-term plan with a financial advisor and pretty much be set. And very, very little is going to change about that. The most important thing is exactly what we said at the beginning of this discussion about money, which is set it up automatically and then don't touch it. Try your best to act like that money isn't even yours yet, because that's kind of the key to that long-term growth that makes investing actually worth your money.
Yeah, and I would push back a little bit on one of the things you said, which is I've worked for good employers who had crappy 401ks. Sometimes it just happens because good 401ks can often be expensive. And so normally, if you have a company that doesn't have a ton of money, they want to offer a 401k for their employees, but they don't want to spend a ton of cash. And so the way the 401k plan makes this money is by pushing you into funds that have really high fees. So just watch out for that. The fees matter. They matter a lot. And then also go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what do you do in that scenario? Is there a way to pick the funds better, or how can you address it?
Your host. The only thing you can do that I'm aware of is to talk to your company and be like, yo, these funds suck. Can we get better funds? Because often the amount you have under management grows, like if you add employees and people save more, you get access to better funds. So gotcha. I think the best thing to do is just make no noise that I'm aware of. Okay. Also might be able to do something fancy with like a self-directed IRA, but I never dug into that enough to really know.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. And so, but the important thing in that is to really just to know where your money is going, right? Know what those expenses are. I would still say, even if you have a, crappy 401k, it's probably still the best place to put your money, although it's suboptimal, right? But out of all of your investment options, it's the only one that's sheltered from tax and all of that stuff. This isn't a financial show, by the way.
Yeah, we got deep on money.
Yeah, no.
Should we pop up the stack?
There was something else you had that you were going to say, though.
Yeah, one last thing on this, which is like there are also financial advisors who are paid not by you, but they get a cut for what they have you invest in, and those people are not your friends. Like you are the product in that situation. Like you want a financial advisor that you pay every time you see them a certain amount, and then they don't make a cut up based on what they recommend to you. Yeah.
Treat it more like a therapist than a somebody who has invested interest basically in where you put your money. That would be So don't go to somebody for free. It's actually not bad advice. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode, and thank you again to Manifold for sponsoring today's episode. You can get $10 worth of credit in the Manifold marketplace. Head over to manifold.co/devt. It's manifold.co/DEVTEA. I want to tell you about something that we're doing in 2019. We're calling them Developer Tea Break Challenges. These are very simple, straightforward messages that I have written over the course of the past couple of months. And there's going to be one every single day. Now, we're going to start it out very simple, and you can learn about the future offerings of the Developer Tea Challenge. We're hopefully going to expand it as it grows over the next couple of months. But we're going to start out very simple, platform that most of you probably use, Twitter, and we're also going to be cross-posting over on the Spectrum community, spectrum.chat. We'll be cross-posting each of these tea break challenges. They are very short, they're actionable, and hopefully they will help you as you continue to grow in your career throughout the year of 2019. There should be a new one ready every day. Now, this is an experiment, so hopefully this will go as planned. Hopefully people will catch on that it'll be helpful, and we'll continue doing it throughout the year. But of course, we have to treat it like an experiment. I'm not going to pour a bunch of time and energy into something that isn't actually helpful. So I encourage you to follow Developer Tea at Developer Tea on Twitter, and go and check out spectrum.chat. You can find the Developer Tea community there. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and until next time, enjoy your tea.